Right now, it really hasn't sunk in. I don't feel anything. It's one of those things where when you have it in your mind for so long, what it would be like, and then after the actual event happens, it tends to take away from it. Right now, I'm still a little bumped and bruised from the game, and it really hasn't happened yet.
In early 1999, Walter Payton, the legendary Chicago Bears running back who redefined the position and remains widely regarded as one of the greatest football players of all time, called a press conference to make an announcement to his many fans about his health. Still in his mid-40s, the sports icon looked noticeably thinner than his playing days, but still looked relatively young and healthy to the reporters gathered in the conference room. Despite outward appearances, however, Walter Payton was anything but healthy, and in fact was facing a life-or-death situation, announcing to a stunned media that he was suffering from a rare liver disease known as primary sclerosing cholangitis. The condition is a long-term and progressive disease characterized by inflammation and scarring of the bile ducts that normally allow bile to drain from the gallbladder. Affected individuals often have no symptoms or experience only mild symptoms of liver disease, such as yellow discoloration of the skin and eyes, itching, and abdominal pain. It was a stunning revelation. Payton was one of the most accomplished professional athletes in football history, and he always looked every bit the part of a superhero on the field, maintaining himself in impeccable condition en route to retiring as the game's all-time leading rusher with 16,726 yards amidst a slew of other records. It had been a brilliant career, capped off with the Chicago Bears winning Super Bowl 20 in a dominant season that saw them lose only one game and picking up nearly every individual accolade a player can win, including 9 Pro Bowl selections, 5 first-team All-Pro selections, and a Most Valuable Player award in 1977. Given the gravity of the prognosis, the emotional toll of the devastating news was overwhelming for Payton, who broke down during the press conference.
To the people that really care about me, to the people that really care about me, just continue to pray. And for those who are going to say what they want to say, may God be with you also.
After the press conference, however, Payton resolved to fight the illness. The same determination of spirit and unwillingness to admit defeat that he exemplified for so long on the football field would carry over now as Payton became a tireless advocate for organ donations and transplants. Don Yeager, an author working with Walter on his autobiography at the time, which was fittingly titled Never Die Easy in reference to his tenacious running style, said that Payton remained positive, convincing himself that he would win the battle with the disease, and even going so far as to say doctors would, quote, write about me in medical journals. Although the disease was wreaking havoc on his body, his weight dropped to about 140 pounds, Payton continued to maintain an active schedule, saying, I've had a lot of days that start good but don't end that way. It makes it hard to plan anything, hard to keep the schedule I used to keep. I love people, and I think they can feel that. I wouldn't wish this situation on anyone. He even made one final public appearance in April, joining his old coach Mike Ditka at a Cubs game and throwing out the ceremonial first pitch. By May, however, the disease had progressed to bile duct cancer, potentially precluding him from receiving a life-saving transplant. It was a devastating development. Payton immediately went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, home to one of the best hospitals on the planet, and immediately underwent a physical to determine whether he'd be eligible for a liver transplant. The exam revealed, however, that the malignant tumor in Payton's bile ducts precluded him from receiving a transplant. Payton spent much of October in the hospital, but he was sent home for hospice care towards the end of the month after his kidneys shut down. Doctors gave him 24 to 48 hours to live. He defied the odds and lived for 6 more days before passing away on November 1st, 1999. Walter Payton was just 46 years old. I'm Derek Kaufman.
I'm Jason Beckerman.
And this is Last Days, Walter Payton.
News of Walter Payton's death spread quickly throughout the world as fans and former athletes expressed their sadness over the passing of a legend. Many people reflected on Payton's legacy on and off the field, remembering him not only as an extraordinary football player, but also as a philanthropist and person of great character. Fans gathered at Soldier Field in Chicago and other memorial sites, leaving flowers and memorabilia in honor of Payton. Former colleagues, teammates, and coaches shared their respects and memories, often highlighting his remarkable talent and the positive impact he had on their lives and on the sport. Virginia McCaskey, daughter of legendary Bears coach George Halas, said, quote, After Brian Piccolo died, my husband and I promised ourselves we wouldn't be so personally involved with the players. We were able to follow that resolve until Walter Payton came into our lives. Jim McMahon, Payton's teammate from 1982 to 87 and the quarterback of that Super Bowl winning team in 1985, said, quote, "It's a big shock because he was the strongest man I met in my entire life. The guy didn't want to lose, didn't want to be tackled, didn't want to miss a game. To miss one game in his career was phenomenal. I couldn't figure out how he could do it week after week." Mike Singletary, the legendary linebacker for those great Bears teams, kept it simple, saying, quote, "I wish there was another word I could think of other than greatness. That's what comes to mind, greatness. He gave me a new respect for running backs. He was the first running back I had ever seen who could have really been a great defensive player." And even in the fraternity of great NFL running backs, Payton loomed large, prompting Eric Dickerson to comment, quote, "He was a guy of small stature, but gigantic heart. He was an icon to all the guys who played that position. I loved to watch him play."
The passing of a true Chicago sports icon also resulted in several local tributes from other sports greats associated with the city. Walter Payton stood shoulder to shoulder with legends like Ernie Banks and Michael Jordan. The Bulls legend, not known for modesty or diminishing his own status in any way, even admitted, quote, "Walter was a Chicago icon long before I arrived there. He was a great man off the field, and his on-the-field accomplishments speak for themselves. I spent a lot of time with Walter, and I truly feel that we have lost a great man." Payton's funeral was attended by family, friends, former teammates, and figures from the sporting world. Memorials were held in Chicago and throughout Illinois, where large crowds gathered to pay tribute. Several moments of silence were observed at NFL games following his death.
So, I was a kid when Walter Payton was at the height of his career, and I was a sports fanatic, and he was bigger than football. He was the only character. Now, I guess the equivalent would be Patrick Mahomes.
Yep.
He was bigger than football. He was the most sort of, in the post-OJ world, he was the guy who took the mantle from OJ and became every kid's hero. Every kid had his jersey. He was the most popular player in the sport, and nobody else came close.
I agree. And to your point, he really transcended what your fandom was. I was a little Jets fan at the time,
Yes.
but I have a picture of me in my house hanging on the wall of me in a Walter Payton jersey.
Yes, I had a Walter Payton shirt as well. It said Payton on the back, and he was maybe even because the sports was more, the world was more monocultured at the time. There was everybody watched football. The ratings those games would get on a Sunday morning were way higher than what they get now because television was far less diffused. And so
he was
Walter
cool.
Payton
You wanted to be him with the headband and the whole thing. He was a real hero.
Everybody loved him. He's the nicest guy in the world. People said great things about him. So parents were happy to have him as the kid's hero. The whole thing. He was just
absolutely.
He was incredible. Given Walter Payton's reputation for sportsmanship and philanthropy, Payton's passing also resulted in several charitable awards and foundations to be established in his honor. The Walter and Connie Payton Foundation was started to carry on Payton's legacy by helping to improve the lives of children in Illinois. Countless other charity runs and benefits were organized to honor Payton's commitment to giving back to the community. And perhaps most enduringly, the NFL Man of the Year Award was renamed the Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year Award in his honor, highlighting players who demonstrate Payton's spirit through their volunteer and charity work. Let's go ahead and take a quick break. More on Walter Payton's legacy when we come back.
Widely regarded as one of the greatest running backs in football history, Payton's unique combination of power, agility, and endurance revolutionized the role of his position, contributing to a redefinition of offensive strategy in the game itself. His illustrious career with the Chicago Bears featured remarkable milestones, including holding the record for most career rushing yards, as I mentioned, touchdowns, carries, yards from scrimmage, and all-purpose yards at the time of his retirement, as well as that Super Bowl championship in 1985. But there were several NFL greats both before and after Payton's time. What made Sweetness special was his impact off the gridiron, which showed the potential for athletes of his caliber to become profound forces for good causes in their communities. Payton's philanthropic efforts, particularly his work with underprivileged children, underscored his commitment to service and solidified his enduring reputation as a community icon. His dedication to others persisted throughout his life and is carried on today through initiatives like the Walter and Connie Payton Foundation that I just mentioned. Through both his awe-inspiring athletic achievements and his extensive charitable involvement, Walter Payton transcended the sport and established a legacy as a paragon of athletic excellence and exemplary citizenship together. Although he'd retire from football as one of the most decorated athletes ever to play the sport, Walter Payton was not heralded as a great prospect when he first came up through the ranks. He received no invitations from the big SEC colleges after establishing himself as one of the upcoming talents out of Mississippi, and he ended up enrolling at Jackson State University, a historically black college where his older brother played football. Once given a chance to shine, however, he immediately established himself as a huge talent, rushing for a school record 65 touchdowns and getting named Black College Player of the Year in 1973. He also acquired the nickname Sweetness, as I mentioned, although the origins of the moniker are somewhat murky, with many saying it stemmed from his sweet disposition and athletic grace, while others insist it was an ironic reference to his aggressive playing style.
Quick piece of trivia for you. Walter Payton is the most famous football player ever out of Jackson State.
Yes.
What is the second most famous association between Jackson State and football?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I don't know.
That was where Deion Sanders got his coaching career started. He went there and then went to Colorado.
Unbelievable.
Just a little piece.
Hard to eclipse Sweetness, though. I'll give it as a number 2.
There you go. In any event, Payton was drafted by the Chicago Bears in the first round of the 1975 draft as the 4th overall pick and immediately became the new hope of a franchise that had never really recovered from the retirement of Gale Sayers in 1972. Payton started slow, recording 0 net rushing yards on 8 attempts in his first game, pretty tragic result. But by the end of the season, he'd found his footing and showed real promise in the backfield, even racking up 134 yards on 20 carries in the final game of the season. He steadily progressed over the ensuing years, racking up Pro Bowl selections and even breaking O.J. Simpson's single-game rushing record with a 275-yard performance against the Vikings in 1977. The record-setting game became part of Payton's mythology. A bit like Michael Jordan's famous flu game, Payton was said to be suffering from a 101-degree fever and intense flu symptoms during the game. Didn't stop him from crushing the competition, and his record stood for 23 years until Corey Dillon of the Cincinnati Bengals broke it in 2000. But despite his individual success on the field, the Bears continued to struggle overall and only landed 2 playoff berths during his first 7 seasons. They were widely known during this period, Derek, as the laughingstock of the NFL. They'd come off the Gale Sayers era, and then the whole franchise went into disrepair, but everything would change with the hiring of a Hall of Fame tight end by the name of Mike Ditka as the new head coach in 1982. With Payton in his running prime and with the emergence of a brash young quarterback named Jim McMahon, the Bears exploded in 1985 as the league's second-best offense. But it was their vaunted 46 defense that year that would become one of the most destructive forces in NFL history, setting a record for fewest points allowed and leading the team to a 15-1 regular season and a lopsided 46-10 victory over the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 20. Famously, Payton was stymied in the Super Bowl itself, never reaching the end zone because the Patriots assigned 2 to 3 defenders on him every play to keep him in check. Coach Ditka later said that one of his great regrets was not getting Payton a touchdown in that Super Bowl, although he knew that Payton being targeted on every play opened up other plays for his offense that game.
This was a big deal in that Super Bowl that he didn't score. He was the clear leader of the team, the most famous individual. But the way Ditka explains it is they had so much attention to Walter Payton in the Patriots' defensive schemes that it freed up people like Refrigerator Perry to score a touchdown. So there were gimmick plays that could work, but it was only because Payton required so much attention.
It's funny because Walter Payton was the shining star on a team that was awful for a number of years. And then by 85, sort of starting in 83, 84, 85, they assembled maybe the greatest team ever. That 85 Bears team is considered maybe the greatest team that's ever assembled. But Walter Payton, still great, became not as essential, right? He was on a great team with a great passing game and maybe the greatest defense of all time, probably is the greatest defense of all time.
And he was many years into his career at that point. The early part of his career in the 70s was really his prime.
Right. This is when he wins the MVP award much earlier on, the whole thing. By this point, the team is fantastic, and that necessarily means that he's not necessarily the focal point. And he didn't love that, I guess, is the word that came out. He didn't love being sort of marginalized in the Super Bowl that year. But
sure, you want to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl if you're Walter Payton, and not getting in the end zone probably was a tough pill to swallow. But far from just a great football team, the 85 Bears were a pop culture juggernaut, crossing over from simply a sports story into the world of general entertainment. And there's no better example of their omnipresence as celebrities than when the team dropped the Super Bowl Shuffle just a few weeks ahead of their big victory. The song was a smash, selling over 500,000 copies and peaking at number 41 on the Billboard Hot 100, and even earned a Grammy nomination for Best R&B Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocals in 1987. And of course, superstar Walter Payton got the first solo on the track.
We're not here to start no trouble. We're just here to do the Super Bowl shuffle. Well, they call me Sweetness, and I like to dance. Running the ball is like making more mans. We had the goal since training camp to give Chicago a Super Bowl champ. And we're not doing this because we're greedy. The Bears are doing it to feed the needy. We didn't come here to look for trouble. We just come here to do the Super Bowl shuffle. This is Speedy Willie, and I'm world class.
This is so embarrassing. It's so embarrassing. I mean,
know.
The song was so embarrassing. It was in a time before athletes had their own voice, right? Athletes weren't allowed to speak about ownership back then. If this was offered up today by some marketing person or the team ownership, the players would no sooner do this. I mean, have you remember this dance?
It would
right?
be mocked mercilessly. This would be all over TikTok in the wrong way, right? This would be them looking foolish. At the time, though, the song had a charitable goal. It did raise a lot of money. $300,000 in profits from the song were donated to the Chicago Community Trust to help families in need with clothing, shelter, and food. And even the lyrics were about the charitable purpose. But you're right. It's hard to take the
sweet
Super Bowl
of you
shuffle.
to put a positive spin on this whole thing. I can't even imagine those players. Walter Payton's no longer with us, but the rest of those players who are looking back on that. If I was friends with Jim McMahon on the golf course with him right now, I would definitely play this video because they're all dancing. They're all doing this little side-to-side dance.
That's right.
And they're singing these really bad lyrics and the whole thing. I mean, it's mortifying.
It is mortifying in retrospect, but it was a big deal, right?
Was.
You remember it was like
huge
everywhere.
Deal. Yeah.
And just 2 years after the Super Bowl victory, Payton announced that he would retire from the NFL after the 1987 season. And during that final season, he split carries with his successor, Neil Anderson, and rushed for a career-low 533 yards with just 4 touchdowns. Although he went out with a disappointing final season, Payton had amassed a resume that was really second to none. He rushed for those 16,726 yards, which broke the record, and also retired as a career leader in receptions for a running back with 492 catches for more than 4,500 yards. And that's something that I think a lot of people forget is he wasn't just a guy who you handed off to. He was a true all-purpose back. And he still holds the record for touchdown passes by a running back with 8. So, when they
would
those
hand the ball,
those gimmicky plays, he could toss them as well, and he had 8 touchdowns throwing. He set several team records for the Bears, including career rushing yards, receptions, touchdowns, and touchdown passes by a running back, eclipsing the mark set by some of the most storied members of the franchise, like Gale Sayers and others. And his number 34 jersey was immediately retired by the Bears, and Payton was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1993.
But Walter Payton was more than just a list of accolades. His relentless running style and finesse moves changed the running back position from a bruising slog to gain a few yards at a time into a balletic performance of athletic grace, strength, and speed. His signature moves, like the stutter step, high stepping, and irregular pacing, became hallmarks of the position in subsequent years, with each successive generation building on the tools he brought to the running game. Payton would say he developed the moves to distract his pursuers during long runs, drawing in defenders to commit it to a particular pursuit angle, and then accelerating or stutter stepping to flummox and elude them. He also reinvented the practice of stiff arming, which had fallen out of favor among running backs in the 1970s. And he even incorporated his high school experience as a long jumper to leap into the end zone, although he was no showboater once he scored. Rather than celebrating or dancing in the end zone, he would just hand the ball to his teammates or the official. Payton lamented the growing practice of touchdown celebrations, but he wasn't a humorless scold with his teammates and was fond of pranking them by rushing into the locker room after games and locking them out in the cold while he took a long, hot shower.
Jason, in researching this, I wanted to watch old Walter Payton clips. And what stood out to me is how modern he looked as a runner. If you watch old NFL
Jim
clips,
Brown,
Jim Brown, he doesn't look
head
like
down, running into the line, right?
Slogging. This guy with the high stepping, there was a real vibrancy to how he moved. He wasn't a showboater. He would always hand off the ball, and he didn't like doing dances. But the way he looked,
he was everybody's favorite player.
It really
That's why
is.
He was so much great. I mean, OJ deserves a lot of credit for this as well. But Walter Payton everybody loved him and wanted to emulate him. And you're right. Everybody today, they don't even know it. These kids today who are running the ball, they don't even know it. But because nobody has a history of the game, if you're 22 years old right now, you have no idea. But they're all built, standing on his shoulders in terms of what they do and the moves they make.
And it looks like his game could translate, right? You watch Michael Jordan, you're like, he could still play in today's NBA. You watch Walter Payton, you're like, he could still be good in today's NFL. And the NFL era that followed Walter Payton's retirement was vastly different than the era he played in. The great Chicago Bears teams of the 80s he led were built around a team-oriented philosophy filled with savvy veterans like himself and Mike Singletary, and in flamboyant, energetic youngsters like quarterback Jim McMahon and William Refrigerator Perry. It's a perfect alchemy of shrewd leadership and youthful dynamism that yielded one of the best seasons in league history. And the years that followed would elevate a sort of me-first, flamboyant, image-conscious players like Deion Sanders and Michael Irvin, which some traditionalists would lament, but kids undoubtedly gravitated towards as the sport exploded in popularity. But Walter Payton really was a throwback to an earlier era when grit, determination, and team-oriented play were the highest possible goals of playing the game the so-called right way. And so I thought it only fitting to give the final word to Mike Ditka, the man who coached Payton during some of those finest years of his career, heard here in an interview explaining what made Sweetness so great.
Well, you didn't have to coach Walter. I mean, what you had to do for Walter is provide enough opportunities. You had to give him enough touches. You had to get the ball in his hand as a runner or receiver, and then he would make the other stuff happen. I would be the greatest fool in the world to say, I had anything to do with his. No. Walter's greatness came from Walter, and that's what he was. He was class, on and off the field.